Hello, welcome to today's American Nuclear Society program, How to Become a Certified Nuclear Professional. My name is Rebecca Steinman, and I'm a Senior Manager of Licensing at Constellation Energy Generation. I'm also the chair of the ANS Certification and Workforce Development Committee, which is responsible for the various credentials that are offered by ANS. I'm really excited to be here today to serve as moderator for our panel discussion about the newest ANS credential offering. Before we get started, there's a couple of administrative things that I need to cover, and then I'll introduce the folks who are joining me on the call. But let's get the admin stuff out of the way first. If you have any questions during this webinar, please type them into the Q&A function. We will attempt to address as many of those questions as possible live during the session today, and those that we aren't able to address we'll ultimately put on the ANS website as part of the FAQ for the CMP. This event is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed to all the event registrants on Monday. And finally, we ask that all participants adhere to the ANS Code of Ethics and the Respectful Behavior Policy, which can be found at ans.org. So with those couple of notes out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. Ryan and Joshua, could you join me, please? I'm joined by two members of the certification committee, Ryan Bechtel and Joshua Baja. Ryan, could you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Ryan Bechtel. Just to get it out of the way, no, I am not related to the company. I have 9 years experience dealing with space nuclear engineering, mostly on the launch safety side, and then another 8 years experience with radiation, radioactive material security and resiliency. Josh?
Sure, thanks Ryan and Rebecca. Hello everyone, my name is Joshua Vaida. I'm a licensed professional engineer, and I've spent more than 20 years working across the commercial nuclear industry and the Department of Energy Complex. I've progressed from working in reactor operations and radiological controls to directing complex decommissioning projects at the Oak Ridge National Lab. And alongside my technical work, I've been deeply involved in advancing professional standards in our field as well. As the chair of the ANS Certification Subcommittee, I helped design and launch the CMP exam itself along with Rebecca and Ryan. I'm excited to share what this exam offers and how it can benefit both individuals and the industry as a whole. Back to Rebecca.
Thank you both. I'm really glad to be joined here with both of you today. I know this has been a very long process. We began this journey back in August of 2022 when Stephen Arndt, who was then the president of ANS at the time, asked me to lead an investigation to try to identify gaps in workforce training that could be addressed by the society as a whole. We had a team of about 10 experts in the field who undertook a series of industry surveys, discussion with other organizations to see what they offer in terms of training and workforce development, as well as trying to take care of several other internal topics in terms of deliberations. Ultimately, we concluded that there was really not as many credentials available to our normally very highly trained nuclear workforce outside of a couple of limited items. You can become a licensed operator at a commercial power plant. You can obtain your nuclear professional engineering license from one of the states where nuclear is offered. You can become a certified Harris physicist. And there's also a handful of certified nuclear medicine technician types of certifications. But outside of those areas, there really doesn't seem to be a lot else out there. So the committee really saw a need for a credential that is readily available to the broader sector of the nuclear industry, but that it still represents a minimum standard of knowledge and skill sets. Thus, the CMP was born. It took about another 2 years to ultimately fully define what the knowledge base and skill set needed to be for the CMP and to develop the exam. And I'm happy to say that we just successfully completed our first testing window last week with the inaugural cohort of CMPs being awarded later in this year. So really exciting time for this exam. And with this little bit of background about how we got here, I'd kind of like to ask Ryan and Joshua to help me out with providing some additional details about the process of how you go about applying for and earning the CMP. We have a couple of slides that we'll share as part of doing that. Ryan, you're up first, so please go ahead.
Thanks, Rebecca. I believe we're going to start with who the target audience for the CMP who the CMP certification is designed for. So it can go anywhere from someone that's working in the trades within the nuclear sector all the way up through a nuclear engine, a licensed nuclear engineer. This certification is ideally less than a professional nuclear engineer. But as you can see on this slide here, there's a whole host of other sub-professions that fall under that, anywhere from people working consultants, technologists, the trades again, mechanical engineers working within the power plants, health physics, medical physics, reliability engineering, and also students that are still in school studying nuclear engineering or related fields. Going to the next slide, please.
All right, appreciate it, Ryan and Rebecca. So briefly talk about the eligibility requirements. As Rebecca indicated, and Ryan also indicated, how we went out and we looked at a survey, market survey, to look at gaps in the industry. And the idea behind this exam at first was to pull in people that were specifically in the trades, as Ryan indicated, but also could be executive managers or people that are in the business side of the nuclear industry or in the communications sector or marketing and business development that just want to understand and show their broad knowledge in the nuclear industry and in the nuclear workforce. So to sit for the CMP, the minimum requirement is just high school or a GED. And then from there, you need to show some kind of connection to nuclear education or experience. That could mean that you've worked 2 years in the nuclear workforce. If you don't have quite 2 years and you're trying to enter as well, this is another exam where if you're outside the nuclear industry, you can potentially enter into the workforce. So you could get or accumulate 80 hours of continuing education that's tied to nuclear topics. That's further down in this webinar is that ANS is also launching and has the professional development short courses, the Nuclear 101. Some of you may have already taken that or have seen it. We have licensing and regulation, and over the next few years, we will add to that library so that if you don't have direct nuclear experience, but you do have a high school education, you can accumulate and take these short courses to get 80 hours of continuing education. Or if you have some other certification, you've been in the Navy Nuclear Power School, you hold an SRO or an RO license, or as Ryan and Rebecca indicated, if you have some kind of medical physics, worked as an RSO at a university or some medical facility, that also will allow the eligibility as well. So it's very broad. It's not meant to box anybody in. And the idea is to strike a balance. We want to make this credential broadly accessible while ensuring that every candidate brings real nuclear knowledge or experience to the table. Next slide, Dan. Briefly then, you got your eligibility requirements. We'll talk about currently the way the exam is set up is we have 3 testing windows a year. The exam is offered 3 times a year so the candidates can plan around their own schedules. So for fall, applications are now open through October 14th. And then the actual testing window runs from November 12th to December 16th. And then the next opportunity would be spring of 2026 and summer of 2026. So this rolling schedule gives you flexibility. You can choose the window that best fits for your work. If you're in a commercial power plant or at the different facilities, whether it's around outages, project deadlines, or training schedules. So right now the exam is slotted for 3 testing windows, and we are open as we get more volume, possibly to extend those windows or even offer it year round. But for now, those are the 3 windows, and these are the 3 that are currently on the schedule for this year and next year. And then with that, turn it back over to Rebecca.
Thanks, Joshua. So this slide just outlines the basics of how you apply for and schedule your exam. It's a fairly straightforward process. There's an application link online at ans.org/certification. It's going to ask you for some basic information about yourself, ways to contact you. There is a fee associated with the exam. It is currently set at $395 for ANS members and $595 for non-members, essentially the delta between those two being roughly the equivalent of membership in ANS. So we would always encourage folks to sign up to be ANS members if they want to be a CMP, but it is absolutely not a requirement to be an ANS member in order to become a certified nuclear professional. Typically, it takes 7 to 14 days for ANS to process your application, make sure that you meet those minimum eligibility requirements. And then once approved, you'll receive an email that tells you how to schedule your appointment. We currently do all of our exam testing at the Pearson VUE testing centers. If you've ever been involved with taking exams, like say for the GMAT or for many other different types of professional societies, many of them use Pearson VUE. They have test centers all across the United States and hundreds of locations. thousands of locations, actually. Some of them are associated with universities, some of them are associated with standalone test facilities. So there's a lot of options for you to be able to schedule an appointment at one of those testing centers during our open window. So that slide, the windows where Joshua just showed on the last slide of when you could take those exams, you could pick any Pearson VUE facility that had an open seat on one of those days in those windows and take your exam there. We are looking into being able to offer a remote exam option, hopefully in 2026. There's some logistical aspects of that, security aspects of that, that's taken us a little bit longer to figure out. So for the short term, we'll be using the Pearson VUE facilities. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. And I think I'm turning things back over to Joshua for a minute.
Yeah, appreciate that. Now we'll kind of talk about the exam itself. There is content in the candidate handbook that is on the ANS website, but just generally looking at the exam for what you guys want to know, it is 100 questions. As Rebecca said, once you apply, meet the eligibility requirements, then you can pick your seat in the testing window through Pearson VUE. When you go into the Pearson VUE Testing Center to take this test, it is a 100-question exam, and you'll have up to 2.5 hours to complete it. Just so everyone knows, the exam isn't just multiple choice. There will be a mix of question types. It is mostly multiple choice. However, there are certain questions and the way they're asked that it's better testing them in different question types, as I talked about. So we got multiple choice, we got multiple select, where there's more than one option. You may need to select 2 out of a list of 4 or 3 out of a list of 5. And then there's also matching questions as well. So you have multiple choice, multiple select, and matching. So it really tests application, not just simply recall. The content is spread across 8 domains, as you see on the slide, that reflect what nuclear professionals actually do, which was based on the market assessment. So we have nuclear fundamentals, we have nuclear safety culture, nuclear power, codes and standards, applied health physics, licensing and regulation, non-power applications, and then fuel cycle and waste management, with a breakdown of the percentages as shown in the pie chart. The exam was built from a national job task analysis, meaning we surveyed professionals across the industry to make sure that the exam represented real skill and knowledge needed in today's workforce. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Rebecca.
Actually, I think Ryan was going to talk about reference and study materials. And
Yes.
basically, what kind of things should you do to prepare for this exam? So Ryan, go ahead and share that information with us.
Yeah, so the place where I would start is, again, by looking at the exam spec that we saw on the previous slide. You can go through that and see what areas you're probably most comfortable with and what areas you may need to increase your background, education, and knowledge of that material. And of course, try to prioritize, like if this one section is worth 30%, this other section is only 5%, allocate your studying time appropriately. When designing the exam, we used several reference study materials. You can see a few of the textbooks that we have up on this list here, including Fundamentals of Nuclear Science and Engineering, Nuclear Energy and Introduction to Concept Systems, Applications of Nuclear Processes, and 2 other textbooks. You can also use some ANS resources, including the ANS Nuclear 101 certification course. That will certainly give you more than enough background in order to take the exam. However, there will be some items that aren't necessarily found in that course that could be found in the exam. In particular, I'm thinking things like the regulations. And also there is going to be a certified nuclear professional practice exam. A few other resources which I would include there is just a basic familiarity, which you can see in the CNP handbook, of some of the CFR regulations and DOE guides that are listed there. You certainly don't need to memorize that material, just have a general familiarity with what's in there. Let's face it, nobody gets enjoyment out of reading the CFR, but just understanding at a conceptual level what each of those regulations are and how they apply to the nuclear field would be the most beneficial. The last thing that I would also, thank you for going to the next slide, list those as well. The other thing that I would include, if you are not already familiar with it, is the chart of the nuclides. That is something that candidates should have an understanding of how to read and gather information from the chart of the nuclides. Even for nuclear engineers, some of us may not have even touched it since freshman or sophomore year of college. I'm a radioisotopes guy, so I use it pretty much all the time, but I recognize that not everyone else does that. Again, just so that you have familiarity with how to read it and gather information from that giant table. So from the studying perspective, obviously there, as mentioned on the previous slide, there is the practice exam. You can go through there and get an idea of which areas you've got a pretty good command of and which ones you might need to study more. And then for those areas where you might need to enhance your background education, you can look at the relevant parts of those textbooks and guides to gain a better understanding and background of those materials. As far as overall difficulty, if you are a degreed nuclear engineer with several years experience in the field, this should be a relatively simple studying process. If you're in the trades, you will need to crack out the textbooks and gain a better knowledge beyond obviously your trades itself, but then also doing some of the math that comes along with some of these basic nuclear science applications. Rebecca, I think you have the next slide.
I do. Thank you for that insight. So we've talked about like how we sign up for the exam, what to kind of expect on the test, what kind of reference materials and study guides are available. The next thing that I want to talk about is what do you expect the day of the exam? So there is a requirement for all Pearson VUE facilities that you must bring a government issued ID, and it has to match your name exactly as how you registered for the exam. You must also bring your registration confirmation email with you. Any IDs that are acceptable for this purpose must have your name, a photograph, and your signature on the card. So a military ID doesn't typically have a signature on it, so it would not be an acceptable form of ID, but passports and typical driver's license, and there are other types of documentation that are acceptable as well. Each test site will list information about what's accessible. If you're going to go to a test center where parking might be an issue, I would highly suggest that you plan ahead. No one needs the extra stress on the day of a test of arriving late and running around. And you also need to be aware that some test centers will not allow candidates if they are past a certain 5 minutes or so late. So you need to look at the particular test center's rules of where you're choosing to go. The reason for that is that some of the test centers you have to walk by other people who are taking exams, and they don't want to be able to allow interruptions for that purpose. But basically what happens is you show up, they'll check your government ID, they'll explain to you the basics about the building, how to find a restroom, etc. And then you'll be escorted to a workstation, and you'll have 2.5 hours exam time clock that starts after you run through a couple of preliminary screens that just describe the basics of how to use their system, how to click through things, how to mark problems, etc. You are allowed to leave during your exam, but please be aware that if you walk away to use the restroom or to go get a drink of water or anything else, the time clock on your exam keeps running. So you should probably plan accordingly if you think you're going to need the entire 2.5 hours to be able to sit for the exam at the workstation that whole time. I think that's all I was going to say about what to expect day of the exam, unless somebody has some other questions. Joshua, do you want to talk about how people get their exam results?
Yes, thanks, Rebecca and Ryan. Just stepping through this again, once you do take the exam, the results are not immediate. I know people, they get, they always want the results immediately. In this process, they come about 6 to 8 weeks after the testing window closes. So remember that testing window, is fairly broad, usually a month. It could be even more. So if you take the exam early in the testing window, you don't particularly get your exams, or you may not know till 6 to 8 weeks after that window closes. And that timing allows for psychometric review and scoring validation. This is very important. This is meant to help you. We use what's called criterion reference scoring, which means you're measured against a fixed standard of competence, not against how other candidates perform. So in addition, we use scaled scoring to make sure that every candidate is treated fairly, no matter which form of the exam they receive. And to me, that's very important because there are going to be different versions of the exam that are given. However, using the psychometrics and the statistics, we end up doing a balanced exam. So there isn't like a set score that you need to get percentage-wise to pass, but we do go through this psychometric and this statistically balanced ability called cut scoring. And that way, this all helps you, which is why we need a little bit of time after you take the exam, because we look at everything in a holistic realm. So there isn't any kind of curving based on your testing window or the candidates that tested with you. It has nothing to do with anybody else. It's just you against the content of the exam so that it's fair and it's something, that we can give out as a reliable, a credible, and accredited credential. So just stay with us a little bit here. This is meant to help you. I know people get urgent about it, but it's about 6 to 8 weeks after the testing window.
All right, thanks for that information, Joshua. So we've gone through the whole process. You pass the exam, you're a CMP. So now what happens? Well, you'll get the ability to display your credentials a number of different ways. You'll receive a certificate, you'll receive a pin. On our first slide, you saw kind of the little shield that said Certified Nuclear Professional CMP. That is the badge that goes with the CMP. You'll get a digital version of that you can use online on LinkedIn or in other places. And whenever you attend ANS meetings, there will be a CNP conference ribbon like we currently have for the nuclear PEs. And speakers and other items that's specific to the CMP. So there'll be lots of different ways that you can display your credentials. Now, just to let everyone know, this is not a one and done type activity. All certification type programs require maintenance, and the CMP is no different. Basically, we review or we lost my train of thought there. The maintenance requirements for the exam require you to renew, that's the word I was trying to think of, your CMP every 3 years. During that 3-year period, you need to complete 36 hours of continuing education requirements. You also need to submit a renewal application and pay a fee. The fee is a little bit lower than when you took the original exam. It's $295 for ANS members and $495 for non-members to renew on a 3-year rolling window. And then you also have to reaffirm that you will continue to adhere to the ANS codes of ethics and respectful behavior policy as part of your CMP renewal every year or every 3 years. So that kind of covers the whole entire process, and that's all the slides that we had available for today. I've seen that a whole bunch of different questions have come in to the Q&A, and I'm really excited about that because really what we want to do here is answer what you guys are interested in knowing about the CMP as opposed to what we thought were the most important aspects, which is what we covered on our slides. The first question that I see up is there a library of materials and references to study for the CMP? As we showed on our previous slide, there are some references that people are expected to be familiar with. The number one thing that you should do to prepare for the CMP is to look at the exam specification guide because it really tells you what materials you need to know. But all of those references that were listed in our slide are also captured in the CMP handbook, which is available for download from the ANS website.
Another thing just to add to that, Rebecca, too, and I know Ryan touched on it as well. I know people really like to gauge how much knowledge they have up front. So ANS is currently working very close to publishing a practice exam. I think that's what everyone would be most interested in. And that most likely, I know Dan said it was coming soon, but very likely to come out next week. That should be available to you guys next week, which will give you an idea. It'll also help along with the textbooks. The main one that Ryan talked about, it was by Murphy, is kind of the one that has a lot of the basis for the CMP exam. But beyond the practice exam, our committee is also working on putting out a study guide that's a little bit longer in the works for you guys. That is something that we are working on. Don't have a timetable for that right now, but probably your best bet would be that the short list of textbooks that Ryan had talked about. And again, ANS is going to put out for purchase a practice test here very, very shortly.
All right, one of the next questions that we have is this for United States nuclear professionals only? I live outside of the United States. Would I be eligible to sit for this? Ryan, do you want to answer that? Or Joshua, you're shaking your head, either one of you.
Go ahead, Ryan, you can start.
I would believe the answer is yes. You could, someone outside the United States still could take this exam.
Yes, I mean, this exam is really meant to be global as well, which is, some of the barriers people have here is with professional engineering license, it's really only looked at through the United States, but this exam is meant for global access to people that work overseas, internationally, Middle East, Asia. So yes, this exam, you don't have to be in the US. It's not US centric. There is some international components to the exam as well, like international regulations. So just to let everyone know that yes, this is offered and it's global credential.
All right, here's the next question that I'd like to pose, and I think both of you are well positioned to answer this, so I'll give Ryan the first cut at it. How is this particular exam or credential different from the nuclear professional engineer? Will it replace the PE exam?
No, it will not replace the nuclear PE exam. Just from a legal perspective, there is a legal definition for a professional engineer in all 50 plus 5 states. The CMP is not meant to replace that. This certification, however, is meant to be for those people that are working within the nuclear field who aren't at the professional engineer track, but rather elsewhere within the nuclear sector, working on those materials. Because as was pointed out earlier in the call, there's a definite lack of professional certifications outside of a handful of existing ones, such as the nuclear PE and the certified health physicist, plus the various medical physics tracks.
And yeah, just to add to
Josh,
that as well, yeah, just to add to that was this exam is heavy qualitative based. It's not meant to be a very like a super technical qualification like a certified health physicist or a certified industrial hygiene or the professional engineering license as an engineer. So it is meant for people who are non-engineers, but you do need to understand, the different broad areas of nuclear. And the idea is to try to standardize different workforce divisions within nuclear so that if you choose to pick a different path, say you're an iron worker, or you're a laborer or a pipe fitter, and you move up through those ranks and you don't want to be a general foreman, but maybe you want to move off into, say, like a field technician role, but you only have high school. The idea here is that you have enough knowledge that you can show to companies or even another manager that they might be more willing, or you'd have an opportunity to get an interview to move out into like the professional side if you choose to do that. So it's really meant to be a qualitative test of your knowledge, more in line with, say, I would call it a PMP or a project management professional cert is. It's kind of that qualitative management side. I mean, there is some mathematics on the exam, but it's very limited and it's very algebra based. It's not calculus based. It's not heavy into the engineering side, as Ryan indicated. So this is meant to just talk about general knowledge, that if you work in the industry, no matter what level you're at or where you work, then you can show that you have broad knowledge and you can speak similar language to normalize you for other job opportunities that you didn't have.
All right, here's a fun question that's related specifically to the knowledge base for the exam. Joshua, I'll let you answer this one. Do you need to know the difference in plant design such as BWR, PWR, CANDO, and SMR?
So the short answer is yes, you do, but you don't need to understand, the super nitty-gritty details, as like an engineer would in terms of interrelated systems. However, you do need to know general differences between a boiling water reactor, pressurized water reactor, and or a CANDU. Just as an example, a CANDU uses heavy water. The other light water reactors, a boiling water reactor or a pressurized water reactor do not. So the test, has that level of differences in those reactors. So it's at a very high level. It's very conceptual based. So you don't have to understand super technical engineering type system interrelations, but it's just broadly speaking, what are some common or general characteristics of certain types of reactors versus others?
All right. And then there are at least 5 or 6 questions here in our open question list that are all related to the availability of the CNP practice exam. We said, oh, you said it's going to be soon. How soon is soon? I think the answer to that is next week. It is intended to go live at the beginning of next week, but definitely during the week next week. So that answers like 6 or 7 questions here. Will there be a formula reference sheet or a calculator available for the examinees to use in the Pearson VUE facilities? Joshua, I'll let you answer that one.
So yes, in the actual candidate handbook that's posted on the website, there is a reference sheet that gives you the equations that you would use to solve any of the problems that would be on the exam. Most of them are related to like radioactive decay. There's binding energy. There's applied health physics where you need to assess equivalent dose based on tissues and convert from millirem to sieverts, different unit conversions. So there's also some constants that will be available. So there is a reference sheet. It's within the handbook. And that same reference sheet you will have and will be available to you when you're in the testing center taking the exam. So any question that's related, that's mathematical based, that you have to use a calculator for, and also the Pearson VUE testing centers do have like an online calculator. I think you might also want to read certain testing centers, you may be able to take in a calculator if it's on an approved list, but there is also an embedded calculator, a simple calculator, I call it, just because this is more algebra based. Like I said, there's not heavy math or there's just exponentials and natural logarithms. So you will have a calculation or a online calculator in the testing center available to you. But we can clarify and we'll follow up as well and post stuff on the ANS website about if we could bring in or if you're allowed to bring in your own that's on an approved list through Pearson VUE. But again, I hope that answers the question unless Rebecca and or Ryan wants to add to that.
Ryan, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Uh, not not too much. What I will say is someone that helped write some of the problems which involved a lot of math, I intentionally tried to write my problems such that you could do it without a calculator. Even some of the ones that involved exponents and natural logs, you should, I wrote it in such a way that you could, if you know what you're doing, you don't necessarily need a calculator to answer the problem.
I also do want to emphasize as well that the test is not meant or intended to be heavy, like quantitative or math based. So, roughly, it's hard to say, and there's different versions that you'd see of the exam depending on what testing window you're in. But generally, 10, maybe 15% of the exam, 10% is probably some mathematical based questions, and then the rest of it is qualitative.
Right. I would say that that's one of the really big differences between, say, the nuclear PE exam, which is very engineering focused and very, mathematics, design, understanding systems. The CMP is more focused on a basic skill set. What's unique and different about the nuclear industry? What does every nuclear professional need to know? Some of that is basic fundamental science, and some of it is, certain things. Why do we have defense in depth? Why do we, what lessons did we learn from other events in our industry? Those are the kind of things that this exam is really focused on, in addition to some basic fundamental aspects. Whereas the PE exam is very focused on, being an engineer. This is not necessarily a nuclear engineering exam, although if you have that background, most of the information on this test would be something that you're already aware of. But this is intended for all the folks who work in our nuclear industry who are never even going to be eligible for the nuclear PE exam because they don't have a 4-year engineering degree. So it's really purposely focused on the topics and the types of questions for that particular audience. Here's a question that's actually about how we go, when you're actually physically taking the exam. We answered the question about calculators. It says, can we mark questions for review at the end of the exam? And the answer is yes, you can mark them for review. There's a place. Pearson VUE actually offers some videos and some information about how like their workstations and their electronic testing system works. So you can actually get online and learn about those types of features at the Pearson VUE test facilities before you show up on the day of the exam. Let's see, next question that's up here. So we already answered one question that said, is the certified nuclear professional open for other nuclear professionals in other countries? But this question is more, is it primarily based on US rules and regulations? or any sort of tie to a willingness to work in the United States? Joshua, do you want to answer that one?
I'd say, for now, as Rebecca indicated, the market study and how we initiated the exam, what we end up doing is we go through about every 6 to 8 years, we'll go through another, they call it a PAC study or professional knowledge study. And so based on feedback and based on where the industry moves, it will change. The content could change over time. I would say that the exam is more heavy based on, US, but I mean, it's standard, it's codes and standards. It's like ASME code, boiler pressure vessel code. There's IEEE standards. So it is open to pulling in some international type um, terms. I know internationally there's a difference between how they label, say, radioactive waste versus what they do in the US. So there are example questions on the exam that do pull some international standards and the way things are performed internationally. So it is meant for that, but I'd say in this initial testing window and the initial launch of this, it may appear that it is more US leaning centric. However, that's not set in stone. It doesn't have to be that way, and it can migrate and mature based on where the industry moves and the needs in the industry.
All right. Next question is up. I'm a professor at a university, and I would like to see if we could somehow attract people from other majors, people from, say, a mathematical, physics, or biology background into the nuclear workforce. Are there any option for people that have a BS or MS in some other degree area to allow them to take the test without 2 years of experience? Ryan, do you want to go there, or Joshua? I don't know which would be best to answer that one.
I'll let Josh go first and then I'll
Sure.
add.
Okay, so that's actually a great question. I like that question. It is really intended also to host other, say, engineers who are non-nuclear. So I work heavily in decommissioning, and we work a lot with, say, structural engineers, civil engineering, electrical, and mechanical. And most of them either came straight out of college, had no nuclear background at all. So if you don't have any nuclear and you've worked completely outside the nuclear industry, one of the options to allow eligibility is to obtain 80 PDH hours of credits. So right now, ANS offers Nuclear 101, which you can get 40 hours for that. And we also have a nuclear license and regulation short course, which you can accumulate another 16. So the idea is ANS is really trying to build out that library. So if you are non-nuclear and you have not worked in the nuclear industry, you have the ability to take these short courses to fill that experience gap so that you can still take the exam even if you don't have the 2 years of experience. But that being said, you don't necessarily have to work heavy in like nuclear commercial power or such as that. As an example, where I work, we do a lot of field work. We do a lot of decommissioning and characterization of legacy old buildings. And you could simply be a laborer, comes into the labor in the workforce in the union. You could be a laborer who then hands out, say, respiratory protection to workers that need it before they go in a building. That would count as the years of experience. So don't think that you got to be doing heavy nuclear direct tied work. As long as you're doing something that represents the nuclear industry in a broad way, that counts. But again, if you don't have any nuclear experience at all, you can then obtain and take these short courses through ANS to get your 80 professional development hours to meet that eligibility requirement.
Ryan, I'll let you add before I jump in to add.
Okay. Yeah, as we've talked about a lot on this call, the exam itself is largely qualitative rather than quantitative. And beyond just getting those 80 hours, I think a big part of it is understanding how the nuclear industry works. So having some experience, even if it's just through those classes, of understanding why ALARA is as foundational as it is to the industry, or why we have these regulations in place. Understanding that background is very important for this exam and for being a CMP. So while I think that someone could come in with a different STEM degree or even a nuclear degree right out of school and try to take this exam, it's still probably important to get an understanding of the field and how and why we operate, either through those classes or through direct experience before taking the exam.
Right. And the only other thing that I would add to that is, if you have less nuclear specific experience and you're counting on some of these other means of meeting your requirements, really take a look at the exam spec. I mean, some of this you may be getting from your experiences in the nuclear industry. Some of it is things that you can self-study. But really, the most important aspect of being well prepared to pass this exam is to understand what the requirements are, and those are very well spelled out in our exam specification. There's 8 separate areas, and it tells you examples of the types of questions or problems or specific topics that you should be familiar with, some of the ones that Ryan mentioned, and then what percentage of those topics show up on the exam. So look at your experiences, look at your educational background, and then seek out additional training to fill in where you might have gaps in those areas. I think that's probably the fastest way to really be successful in practicing the exam or preparing for this exam. If it turns out, you could take a university course. There's lots of university courses that would fulfill many of these requirements. Some of them are online courses, some of them are in person. But I think there is substantial flexibility in being able to prepare for this exam. And so if you think you have a limitation, it never hurts to just apply. And if you don't quite make the requirements, we can give you some suggestions for how to do it. And as Joshua mentioned earlier, we're definitely in the process of providing many more different types of ANS specific education to fulfill these requirements. The Nuclear 101 is a great place to start for somebody who has no nuclear background whatsoever to start, preparing and getting ready. But there's also courses acceptable from outside organizations. So if you've taken IMPO courses or maybe an NEI class or something from there, many of those courses, if they have the requisite nuclear background focus, would be applicable to your 80 hours for this exam. Another question that I got, and this will be an interesting one that I'll answer real quick, and then I'll do 1 or 2 more, and then we'll probably call it the end of our time today because we're almost up to 45 minutes. One of them is, thanks for the explanation. Okay, is there any means for the application fee waiver? So ANS has some need-based processes available for a variety of different activities. And there are need-based, basically scholarships or helpful ways to either get a complete fee waiver or a partial fee waiver for people who meet the eligibility requirements for that. The information for that is on the ANS website and can be found near the application material. So that does exist in this case. The other question, and I'll actually let Ryan go first and then Joshua can probably add on to it, is how can this certification be used and be useful in the industry? And are there any companies that already accept or use this credential for any purposes? So Ryan, I'll let you go first.
So what the credential does show is that you do have a certain minimum level of competency within the field, with experience within the field. And it shows a potential employer, hey, this person has gone out there, been proactive, and gotten this certification to be able to probably show that they have the requisite knowledge to come in and work in or knowledge and experience to work within the nuclear industry. I'm not a hiring manager myself right now, but all things being equal, if there were 2 candidates, the one with the CMP, in my mind, would, just because it's showing that extra ambition, would be the defining trait between the 2.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to add on
Josh?
to that. Yeah, I'd like to add on to that as well. So I feel that, again, if you go and pursue any certification that you pursue or license or certification, right, it does show that you're willing to learn that body of knowledge. And that shows employers, that you understand certain concepts and or areas that the industry is invested in. And it allows you to communicate with common groups that you might have to interact with. Because we all know, depending on what we do or what company we work for, what industry we work in, you never do anything by yourself or in an individual division. You're always interfacing, whether it's with regulatory and licensing individuals, permitting, environmental scientists, radiation protection technologists. This exam tests like transportation, waste management, applied health physics. So what this exam shows and what it would show to an employer or a manager is that you wouldn't have had to work in radiation protection, but if you take this exam and you understand applied health physics and non-power applications, dosimetry, then you feel you're more equipped to interface and interact with group meetings at your company and your industry where radiation protection is involved. That's just an example. Or if you're shipping radioactive waste, you can interact with the waste management, transportation. You understand those codes and standards, those regulations. To right now, the certification is in its infancy stage. The idea is for this to grow and become accredited. That's something that we're working on as well. But it's also meant that once we jump through it and we get all the interest and we drive this certification forward, there are employers, and I work on the Oak Ridge Reservation. So there's multiple companies that are involved with that. All the hiring managers, the C-suite type managers that I've talked to directly are excited about this and they will end up promoting it. They want to promote it. So the fact that we're getting as much interest as we are is a really exciting time. So yes, this will be eventually driven toward where employers will list it on their job certifications. So just keep that in mind that there are some companies that do list it right now as a preferred qualification for job opportunities.
And I'll just add on to that really quickly that we need to have a little bit of runtime with this credential to be able to prove to the industry that it's doing what we said that we're doing, which our ultimate goal is to set a minimum standard for what it means to be a certified nuclear professional, that you have some, minimum level of skill set. And then once we can prove that we have that track record with our examinees, we are definitely going to be targeting human resources groups at major nuclear employers and other organizations to make sure that they're all aware of the existence of this, and to talk about the value of it, and to try to encourage more companies and more people who are hiring engineers or hiring into the workforce to really recognize and acknowledge this. So we are very early in the infancy, but we understand that, if credentials aren't recognized by various organizations, then what's the value to the individual who earns that credential? We understand that need, and we're working very much to improve how this credential is being perceived and how it will be used in the nuclear workforce of the future. I think we have time for one more quick question. There's a lot of really good questions that I'm not going to be able to get to. Would this certification be helpful for those that work more on the policy side of things? For example, if somebody works in international development organization like the World Bank and they're just entering the nuclear field, would you see this certificate as being useful to that kind of application? Joshua, you want to go ahead and do that one?
Can you kind of explain that again? It was a little bit of a nuanced question.
I think it was just like, I think it's more focused on, the audience. Would say somebody who works internationally that isn't a nuclear engineer, could they find this CMP useful? Or are there, I guess maybe the real question is thinking outside of the box, what are some other examples that we see? Not somebody who necessarily works at a DOE facility or at a commercial nuclear power plant, but who else in our industry might find the CMP a useful certification?
Yeah, so one of the things I thought about too was say you are on the service side. So say you work for like a pump company or you work for Granger, right, that sells, protective equipment, whether it's hard hats or boots or even some of that kind of stuff. So you work for kind of vendors that maybe support or not only have commercial business, but you also support the nuclear side. Something like that, that if you understand, the requirements of nuclear in a broad base, you work for like a different vendor like FlowServe. You might have clients that are non-nuclear related and you do business over there, but you want to expand and be able to help people across the nuclear industry. And a certification like this would show that you have base knowledge and the actual clients within the industry, or I'd say the customers in this case in the industry, would be more inclined to work with you and your company as a vendor if you have multiple people that are certified nuclear professionals because your products are directly supporting what they need.
All right. Unfortunately, I think we're about out of time for today. There is still a good 20 or 30 questions that have not been answered. And so ANS will go through all of those, and Joshua and Ryan and I will help write up written answers to all of them and post as many of them as possible to the FAQ that is associated with the ANS website for the CMP. So hopefully all the questions that we weren't able to answer today will be either answered there. But if you come up with any other questions at any time, you can always email the asknuclear@ans.org email address, and you'll be able to get an answer to specific questions. I know there were certain items in here about, is there a way to find out if my particular eligibility requirements meet things without paying the fee and some of those types of items. We're going to try to get more and more information on the website related to that to help people better understand before they pay the application fee whether or not they're likely to be successful in being accepted to sit for the exam. So we'll definitely get that one answered online as soon as possible. Any last things that either of you would like to say? Joshua, I'll let you go first. Any closing remarks?
No, I just say that I am excited about this. I think this does fill a gap. I know there's other people that are really excited because either one, we really wanted to open this up for people who are really in the trades or who really don't want to go back or have interest in pursuing college, but maybe they have a skill. Maybe they're a welder, certified welder. Like I said, even people that pursued other degrees, say in finance or business or communications that maybe work, and have to support the nuclear side and just want to gain a little bit more knowledge and also be able to have a seat at the table, call it like shared governance. Sometimes that word is used. So I feel really excited about this to kind of bring everyone together. And again, it's not even just US based, it's global based. So look at this as a global credential going forward. And I'm really excited and I really want feedback from you guys whenever the practice exam comes out, anything on exam content, how you feel after you take the exam, all of those things. We actually want you to provide that feedback to us so we can end up making this the best there is and that ANS will have a world-class credential.
Well, that was a pretty exciting end. Ryan, is there any closing remarks that you would like to share?
I don't think I can top that.
I feel for you. I'm not sure I could either.
Yeah.
I'm really excited at the number of people who showed up today and the number of questions. It shows that there's excitement about this, there's interest in this. And as Joshua said, we very much want to make this a useful and recognized certification for our industry. And I think that there are opportunities in the future for ANS to develop more detailed certifications for specific topics. So if anybody on the call today has any recommendations for future activities for the Certification and Workforce Development Committee, please feel free to reach out in ANS and share those ideas because all that feedback really helps us just to improve our programs and our offerings in the future. And I guess given that, we'll go ahead and call it an end of our day. Thank you so much for participating.